welcome to my home. It's really nice of you to come all this way from America, because here in the Middle East, I know that that can be quite a journey for just a group of students. And man, I love having company over all the time. However, this time is a little different. I actually have some plans tonight, and so I can only entertain you for a few minutes. Actually, I have a really big dinner tonight. Do you guys want to hear about it? Okay, well, in order to do that, there's a little bit of a backstory, so I'm going to go ahead and jump into that. I want to tell you about a few months ago, the last time Jesus came over to my house. I'm Martha, and so as you guys might have heard, I really enjoy spending time with Jesus because he's good friends with my family. And what's so neat is that day, just out of nowhere, it wasn't just him, but it was his disciples, and there were 13 plus people coming into my home. And I love taking care of that many people. But then it dawned on me, these weren't just any dinner guests. And as you guys probably know, that in my culture, having guests over is a big deal. You can't just sit down and make them comfortable. You have to provide for them, make them feel at home, and turn strangers into friends. And these weren't just any people. These were the people traveling around Israel that everyone was talking about. Because I was so close to the temple when I grew up, because it's right on the other side of the hill that I live on, every time I've heard the law and the prophets, it just pales into comparison to the things that Jesus says when he starts talking. It's like he jumps out of it. And just the miracles he does, have you guys heard of some of the things he does? That guy is going to be eating my food. And all those thoughts were running through my head, and as I started preparing, I realized something. Here I am in the kitchen, and then in the living room, there were all these people having fun, including my sister. She was supposed to help me. How rude is that? And it's actually sort of inappropriate that she, a woman, was in the living room. She should have been helping me in the kitchen. And so, have you guys ever looked back on a situation in your life and you replayed the thoughts in your head, and you replayed the actions that you did, and you just can't even figure out why in the world you did that in that moment? Well, that's how I feel about this story. So yes, it's a little embarrassing, but I promise it gets better. I got mad. I was mad at Jesus. I was mad at my innocent little sister. And you know how when you're ready to confront someone, sometimes you just play it through in your head a few times, trying to make sure you say the right thing? Well, I went straight to Jesus, because how dare he, if he wants to eat, let my sister, who's supposed to be helping me, just sit there and do nothing? And so I got up the nerve. I made it so that the pot wouldn't boil over anything, and I marched right up to Jesus, and I looked at him in his face, and I pointed at her, Mary, and I said, "Why are you letting my sister sit here when she should be helping me cook dinner?" Man, and I will never forget what he said to me next. And it's funny, because as mad as I was at him, he didn't really seem that mad at me. And he went, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about so many things, but only one thing is needed. Mary chose what was better, and that will not be taken away from her." And I'd like to tell you how the rest of the night went, but it was kind of a blur. What I do remember, however, was the next day when I finally got a chance to process what happened and what Jesus said. I was mad. I was frustrated. How did Jesus expect me to just abandon all of my responsibilities? How did he expect me just to be lazy? How are things going to get done if I just sat there the whole time? That made absolutely no sense to me. And then I went to a pretty dark place, I'm not gonna lie, and I started saying things like, "We'll see if he's ever welcome in this house again. See if I ever cook a meal again and serve people again." And once I passed that stage of processing through what happened, I got to a more sober mind. And I realized that Jesus had actually taught me a pretty valuable lesson. I was thinking back on all of my actions that night. And I think the best way to explain it would actually to be explaining it in something that maybe you and your culture understand. I hear you guys have these boxes called smartphones, and they can take these things called pictures, and I don't understand the whole gist of that, but what I do know is that when you want to take a picture, you look at the scenery, and then you can actually click on what you want to focus on. So the rest of the scenery is there, but the thing that's most in focus is the thing that you click on. And so when the picture's taken, there's only one thing in focus, and the rest of the background just kind of adds to it. And I realized that Mary took the right picture that night, and I didn't. I realized that what I did was I put Jesus in the background, and not only that, but I put focus on my tasks, and then I expected both Jesus and my sister to cater to the tasks that I wanted to get done. And that was hard to swallow. But you know what? I'm glad I learned that lesson, because I looked back and I realized kind of how not a big deal that night was. Because that lesson that I learned then actually helped me recently. My brother Lazarus died. And Jesus wasn't there. Mary and I sent to him. He was great friends with my brother, and Jesus was not there the day my brother died. And so we went through 3 full days of mourning, through preparing for the burial, for burying him, and all of that weight was on our shoulders. And I'm the oldest, and so there was a lot of pressure for me to handle the situation right and to process through these things, and I couldn't understand why, if Jesus loves me, he came late. So when I got word that he was heading up the hill, I went out to go meet him. And I'll never forget those steps that I took, because it was one of those moments of tunnel vision where everything that I had been dealing with that was sitting on my shoulders, I carried with me when I went to Jesus. And the last few steps I took, I knew exactly what I wanted to say to him. And I looked at him and I said, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But the funny thing is that wasn't the only thing I said, because once those words came out of my mouth, something clicked inside of me, and I said, but I know that even now, God will do whatever you ask. And then Jesus and I had a really funny conversation that I still don't completely understand. He said to me, you know, your brother's going to live again. And then he goes, actually, I'm the resurrection and the life. Do you believe that, Martha? And I feel like he knew that what I said next was as much for his benefit as it was for mine, when I said, yes, I believe in you. You are the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God, who was to come into the world. And when I admitted that, all of a sudden, just me looking at Jesus, he was in front of me, and then he kind of overtook my entire being. And that weight I carried to him when I was mourning suddenly became more dull of pain. And my focus was able to be on him when I realized, you know, he really has the situation in control. A few hours later, Jesus took us all to the tomb. And I didn't understand why, but he asked us to open up the tomb, and he called my brother back to life. What was amazing is in that moment when I realized just kind of naturally, that I focused on Jesus, I learned more about who he was, and then he became that right before my very eyes. It was amazing. And you know what? I'm glad that I learned that hard lesson a few months ago, because recently when we went through that tragedy, I don't know what I would have done. And it really is neat how the glory of God shone, even though I didn't completely understand. Yes, I believed in Jesus, but the fact that he raised my brother from the dead didn't even make sense, and it still doesn't even make sense to me. And then the fact that he even came 4 days late, that made no sense to me either. But Jesus still worked in that situation, still had that moment with me, and showed me more of who he was. So that brings us to today. Actually, I'm cooking dinner tonight. And my guests, that's Jesus and his disciples. I decided that I'm going to throw a meal for Jesus tonight by myself. And you know what? I'm not stressed out this time. I'm really not. Because you know what? I realized that this gets to be my service to Jesus. And Mary, well, it's funny because I was actually talking to her earlier, and she has her own plans for tonight. And so while I get to serve Jesus and just focus on what I'm doing, my little sister has room to serve Jesus in the way that she wants to. And so, you know, I'd have her come entertain you guys while I go prepare for tonight, but actually she's at the market right now making a purchase. So I'm sorry I had to leave you like this, but I'm gonna go prepare a meal. That's it. How long was that?
12.